Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome to this very, very exclusive conversation. She's a computer scientist, she's a philanthropist, she's a doting mother, she's also one of the most powerful and influential women in the world. She needs no introduction, and it's a pleasure to be able to speak with her. Melinda French Gates, namaste, and welcome to Bharat.
Thanks for having me.
7 years now since you last visited?
Yes, too long.
Has India changed for you? And if yes, what has changed?
Oh, so much has changed in India. You know, I think the digital piece is just so apparent now. I knew of all the work that was being built underneath all of that, but now to see how it's changing citizens' lives, that they can have digital bank accounts, that, 470 million bank accounts have been opened, half of which are women-led bank accounts. Wow, what a change. But even to see that so many things, everybody has their Aadhaar ID card, you have your COVID vaccination on your phone. I mean, just digital has really taken off here in a powerful way, and it looks like it's changing society.
Did it surprise you that it was implemented in this scale over the last 7 years in India?
Yeah, to see how quickly it has taken off. I knew about all of the regulations that had gone in. I knew about the digital rails that were being laid. But to see it escalate so quickly, and I do think COVID had a part to do with that, right? Yeah. And I think there were a lot of tragic things that happened with COVID, but I think that's one of the positive outcomes from COVID.
You're somebody in 2016, you said women need to get into science and technology. We need to have more women technologists. Even the recent Goalkeepers report just a few months ago, you talked about not just empowering women, but giving women more power. So can you tell me a little more about where you come from, or what's the thought behind that?
Sure. Well, I think we need to have women in positions of power at all levels of society, and we aren't there anywhere in the world yet. But that means making sure our biggest sectors, whether it's technology, because that runs our society, whether it's finance, that's where money flows, whether it's politics, that's who makes our policy, whether it's media, that's who tells our stories. Women need to be there at the top. And when I say, instead of talking about empowering women, it's bringing women into their full power. So what do I mean by that? It's not enough to make sure the woman has a good job, but if she doesn't have somewhere to leave her children, a good child care, she can't be at her job as the number of hours she wants to be there. Or if a woman has a bank account, but it's not in her name, or the property's not in her name, she's not fully empowered. And so I think we need to really shift and look at the barriers around women and break those down so she can step into her full power.
How easy or difficult is it to achieve this?
Well, it depends. I mean, different societies are easier, I think, than others. But what I'll say that I'm impressed with here in India is the commitment all the way from the Prime Minister through the various ministries of government. Prime Minister Modi has put this squarely on the agenda, and sometimes you hear Prime Minister talk about these things, but what I see is action coming out of this government. The Women and Child Welfare Department, I was with them, or Development Department, I was with them last night, hearing all the different ministries baking gender policy into their programs, seeing that, the government is serious about women's health. Those are all important steps and actions that you can see happening.
There's a lot of work that the Gates Foundation is doing on ground here. So are you keen to go and have a look at, really test the claims that are being made by the government?
Absolutely. I will be up in UP tomorrow and looking at a lot of the health systems. I've done that before. But even just yesterday, I was out in South Delhi in a community, and I got to see, the transfer payment system, the postal system, and see, the woman going out in the community visiting women. There were 14 women who came together who all had bank accounts, and not only had them, but were using them, both making deposits, taking money out. And to talk to those women and just ask them the question, what does it mean to you to have money, to have your own money? They all talked about how people around them see them differently. And you see women's agency coming forward because of this program to make sure they have digital bank accounts.
So does financial inclusion make such a big difference, or digitally being empowered or, enabled? Let's not say empowered, but let's say enabled. Does that make such a difference? And do you think the government is in the right direction? Has it done enough so far? Or what do you think are the learnings that other nations can take from India?
Well, I'm looking really forward to India is hosting the G20 this year. And I think there are so many lessons from India that can be shared with the rest of the world. I think India is absolutely headed in the right direction on digital. It's not only making sure men have bank accounts, digital bank accounts, but it's doing the extra programming to make sure that women have them and are taught how to use them. And then what you can do after that is start to layer credit on top of that, and you can start to have lending on top of that. And so what those digital rails will do, when a woman has a bank account and she can save, even if it's $1 a day or $2 a day, she's planning for the future. I talk to many of these women, and they're thinking about their children's education. And so when you think about women investing in their own children and families, wow, you want to talk about empowering a country? That's powerful.
Will that also power innovation? Would you think that will also help push more education within society and also among women?
Definitely, because I think the government is opening, credit to women-led businesses and women entrepreneurs. I just spoke at an event here called Women Lift, which is about women in health. It's incredibly important that society has more female scientists, more female computer technology, but even women at the grassroots level. So often women do have jobs. They have jobs in the informal sector. They see what society needs in their community. So if they can start to create businesses and have that all done through their phones, wow, we don't even know actually what we're unlocking, and that to me is exciting.
The pandemic we talked about, it was tough on all of us, but you also mentioned that it was unequal to women.
Well, because it pushed so many women worldwide out of the labor force, right? So when all these businesses shut down and people were at home, finally the invisible became visible. Women are expected in every society in the world to take care of the children. And usually the elderly. Some of that's the loving work we want to do for our children and our parents, but it's also quite tedious and laborious, some of it. And so what we're seeing is that women are going back, men and women are going back to their jobs, but women aren't going back at the same rate because there's been a crisis now in the child care sector and they don't have anywhere to put the children. And so until we address that, you're not going to get women fully back in the formal sector.
What we saw in the pandemic was ASHA workers or women across the country going across and spreading this message of wanting to have, having to get vaccinated. Some of those stories are so inspiring. Do you believe the world needs to know those stories and learn from them? There are many nations that could actually follow India's template.
Oh my gosh, there are so many nations that need to learn from that. I mean, those ASHA workers are the frontline soldiers. And not even before we got immunizations, I saw the ASHA workers. I was home in Seattle. We were all home. I was home in Seattle cheering because I've met those women, some of them. They were out giving messages early on about hand washing, about wearing masks, about social distancing. They were creating masks. They were sewing masks and distributing. Then when there finally was a vaccine available, they were the front line of making sure people had the right information, knew the vaccine was coming, and then got people vaccinated. There isn't a health system that I know in the world that wouldn't like to have the ASHA system that is here in India.
You believe India can technologically support such nations? What do you think we need to do, or how is it that we can take this learning forward and help other nations?
Well, I think through the G20, really connecting with Africa in the South-South collaboration to help them see what was done in terms of the open source ID, what was done in terms of the open source digital rail on the financial pieces, making sure they understand that and have that. I think they will then take that on in the right way for their own countries, and then they'll build. I mean, that's the other thing is there are all these opportunities in India to build applications on top of those digital rails. We're just beginning to see the tip of the iceberg. There will also be amazing applications that can come out of Africa that they'll see for their own solutions. So it creates new parts of the economy and new jobs, and I think that's really exciting. But what I know is that other countries want to learn from their cohort who's like them, who's moving from low to middle income country, right? And I think that's exactly the kind of collaboration that's needed.
Do you also believe that with India with 4% of the landmass, nearly 25% of the world's population, and 50% is women, what is it that it's doing right so far? And what is it that we need to do as a country to take this further?
I think India is really looking at the health sector and saying, how do we make sure that fewer women die in childbirth, more children survive, adolescent girls get the proper nutrition they need to grow up and be healthy moms? I see India doing that not just for the middle class, but really for those who are most impoverished. I think those are incredible lessons. I think in terms of making a burgeoning middle class, it's making sure even the poor have access to a digital bank account and making sure they know what services are available and what government services are available. The self-help groups, that's another innovation that was started here. 86 million women, into 8 million self-help groups. Those groups have been going, some of them for 20 and 30 years. What we're seeing is they move from a rights base and a health base onto, okay, what does entrepreneurship mean? What does leadership mean? What does it mean if I want to be part of the financial sector? So you see them moving along in terms of their knowledge and education and pulling others in. That is a model that can be used in so many other places in the world.
You see more women in technology in India and in health and in science from the last time you came around here?
It seems that way. I hear that the numbers are on the rise. But yes, I think you're getting more women in the sciences.
How has the approach been to diversity? You've pushed for diversity and you've advocated it very strongly. Do you believe that Indian corporates are now looking at, and there is perhaps a more visible inclusion and also women in top positions in leadership?
I think you need to look at sort of sectors of the corporations and the economy. So in the tech sector, yes, I think you see far more women coming through that sector and saying, those are jobs I want. There are far more Indian technologists coming along. So I think they might get there even sooner than some of the older industries. But I think it's important to have all industries come forward, because until women can see that women at the very top of society, I call it like 36, we can look up and see 36 archetypes of men in every industry. And so a young boy can look up and say, I want to be like those 3 men or those 3. Until a young woman can look up and in every sector of society see 36 archetypes of women, we're not there yet.
But how much of this, and I'm asking you a very straight question, how much of this is because women have not been allowed to grow, or there is a dearth of really capable women coming through the system? So there are two aspects which we have to look at. So which perhaps is more evident for you?
I think what's more evident for me is that we haven't allowed women to get there in the past. So even take in medicine.
Right.
Finally, I think the Indian institutions are graduating about the same number of men and women doctors. But if you look at the very top of medicine in India, the top surgeons, those positions are still held often by men. Or you look at most of the frontline workers, those are women, but you don't see a ton of women running hospitals. That is because we did hold women back for a long time. Now that women are getting there in the right numbers, we have to look at what are the barriers that hold them back, clear the way, and you're going to see lots of women rise to the top.
How did you manage, and if I may ask this, and how can women manage this? Because much more is expected from women than men. They are nurturers, they are nourishers, they are also developers, technology, everything. There's so much more that a woman is capable of compared to a man. And when you say that women need to come into industry, then there is a compromise that has happened, because somebody has to take care of the nourishing part of the family. So how does one balance that? Because society, that's a big challenge. Multiple countries, multiple cultures, you talked about it, and this is the world over. Do you think that perhaps is the biggest hindrance? Because a woman suddenly is caught between choosing a career and also the role of a mother, a nurturer, somebody who's going to support and be the pillar of support for the family.
I think society has put that on women. I think society has said for a long time, it is the women who will nurture the children, who will be there to, help them with their tears or fill their lunchbox when they go to school. But what I know to be true is in the Nordic countries, where they've had things like very robust paid family medical leave policies now for over 30 years, not just the women take off time at the birth of the child, but the man takes off time. Yeah. And what he will tell you now is the men will say, are you kidding? Why would I not take time off when my child is born? And once he does, he then helps more with the children all through the course of their life. And so I think we need to change the societal norm so that women can do both. If their husband's helping them, there is a way to do both.
My final 2 questions. What are the goals for you going forward in the next 2 or 3 years? What have you set yourself that you want to achieve as co-chair of the Gates Foundation?
I want to see women at more places in society. And I know we can get there, but I look sector after sector. I look in agriculture, I look in finance, I look in tech, and say, how do we get women further along? Because then we will start to change society. So that is a big goal for me. I also want to make sure that children around the world get fully vaccinated. You know, India, again, has been a model for this. Even during the COVID crisis, you know, you all got over a 90% vaccination rate, right?
Yes.
2.2 billion COVID vaccines were made here in India. And having that focus on vaccinations, that will save children's lives. And so I'd love to see more of that around the world.
As life throws a lot of curveballs at us, what gives you hope and optimism? My final question.
When I see the ingenuity of people, you know, even you meet a man or a woman who is starting a new business or figuring out a way to get their kids in school, there isn't a person I've ever asked anywhere in the world, when I ask them what their hopes and dreams are, if they're a parent, they always talk about their kids. And so it gives me hope seeing that people are working towards a future where life is better for everybody.
We need you more often in India. So on that note, I thank you for having this conversation with us.
Thanks for the time.